Although I've been privileged to enjoy many conversations with one of my contemporaries, a man born blind, I have to say I remain incapable of imagining what his daily life experience must be like. I'm in no doubt that my own life is the richer for knowing him. Time and again, he proffers unique and insightful perceptions. But I would never wish such blindness on anyone. John 9, of course, is about so much more than not being able to see, an absence of optical capabilities. The Johannine Jesus clearly endorses my own conviction that being blind from birth does not necessarily limit the possibility of access to profound insight. John's man born blind is clearly as canny as they come, and he certainly has the religious teachers sus to a T, even though he cannot see them. Would that were true of everyone else who appears in John's story. Without in any way wanting to trivialize the limitations that are consequent on physical blindness, John's narrative is insistent that there is more to blindness than first meets the eye. There is, it makes clear, more than one kind of blindness. In this narrative, Jesus cannot be faulted for his compassion to the actual blindness of the man born blind. He plays his part in the restoration of impaired sight using a mix of mud, spittle, and prayer. We soon realized, however, that it is not immediately obvious how our various manifestations of human blindness should be ranked in order of life diminishing priority. There are parallels here with other stories about people who experience long-term social exclusion and the humiliating effects of oppression. Wicked injustices that quickly find themselves exposed under the glare of a searching light. And soon we are learning that such injustices repeatedly turn out to be far more appalling than at first we assumed. And we find ourselves remembering now that Jesus was first introduced to the hearers of the fourth gospel as the true light coming into the world. It was but a few chapters back from John 9 in chapter 4 that Jesus responded to a woman drawing water at a well that retrospectively resonates very strongly with this man in chapter 9. Jesus refused to collude with any of the established everyday excuses for her exclusion and humiliation. In her case, simply because she is a woman. He does not mandate her gender as an adequate ground for social isolation or relegation to menial labor. Was it her fault she was born a woman? I can hear John's Jesus ask. If Jesus was seen meeting this woman in 2020, my guess is that part of his explanation to surprised and shocked disciple companions, not exactly famous for our own insightfulness, he would now include that there is no traceable genetic evidence that women have any less intrinsic ability to participate in society differently from men. Then going on to argue, I guess, that apparent differences are entirely socially constructed and wickedly communicated as prejudice from generation to generation. The killing of George Floyd under the knee of a law enforcement officer suggests many parallels. As also especially in the UK, does the death of a disproportionate number of Black and minority ethnic people as the result of the global pandemic. Was it this man's fault that he was born Black? I can hear John's Jesus ask. Again, I'm guessing that if Jesus were working this through with 2020 disciples, he would be absolutely clear that there is no predetermined DNA-related explanation whatsoever for the violent treatment meted out by law enforcement officers on Black and minority ethnic people. Nor, he would add, any intrinsic susceptibility to COVID-19. I then imagine him going on to say that all these people, the woman at the well, the man born blind, and George Floyd, demonstrate for us the inevitable outcomes of prolonged prejudicial treatment, all entirely socially constructed and systemically perpetuated by prejudice endemic in the human family. I find it striking that both the man born blind and the woman at the well both emerge from their encounters with Jesus, immediately engaging with their home communities in ways that I doubt themselves they would ever have thought possible. Almost instantaneously, the truth emerges that these are gifted members of the human community, each with a great deal to offer to the societies they inhabit. They have, it seems, an already competent analysis of social justice and injustice, and are quick to engage families and friends, triggering further processes of potential transformation. As the life of George Floyd has come to light through the tributes at his funeral, it becomes clear that he had a great deal in common with the characters in our Johannine narratives. It is absolutely tragic that it should take his death to bring to light the normality of this man as simply another companion in our human family. It is now clear that he had no more and no less intrinsic potential than any of us to make his mark, except that on account of now well-mapped systems of injustice, stretching back to the transatlantic slave trade and beyond, Floyd's life was robbed of potential by the scourge of racism. In the spirit of John 9, the truth is that none of us can pretend that we are free from prejudicial blindness, the kind that Jesus so skillfully exposed in those who quite clearly thought of themselves as insightful ones, the disciples and the recognized religious leaders that feature in John's narrative. Clearly, people in extreme positions of power, presidents, prime ministers, elected government officials, appointed religious leaders, law enforcement officers, and so on, do have a great deal to answer for. It is a wise and just saying, to those whom much is given, it is right that much is expected. None of us, however, can presume to count ourselves among the insightful ones. After careful examination, we all have a responsibility, with and like Jesus, to find our own ways of taking a stand, taking a knee, to crush once and for all the wicked untruth about intrinsic difference based on ethnic identity. George Floyd in the USA, as well as in the UK, folk like Jimmy Mabenga, Rashan Charles, Edson da Costa, Sarah Reed, Sheko Bayo, and many others whose names have been brought back into the light during recent weeks, would never have found themselves susceptible to police brutality and murder had it not been for a long history of segregation and deprivation within the human family, the one human race. Black and minority ethnic people in the UK would not be appearing as a focus of shocking mortality statistics had it not been for a long history of social exclusion and sustained deprivation, making them far more likely than most white Britons to occupy low status, significantly virus-exposed forms of employment, and levels of pay inevitably leading on average to poorer housing, poorer diets, and elevated susceptibility to various health issues. As Christian disciples in 2020, we have no more excuse than the disciples who rebuked Jesus for being too familiar with a woman at a well, or the religious leaders who were more intent on cornering Jesus for doing a good deed on a Sunday, ridiculing the man born blind, than they had in failing to champion the causes of all who find themselves, for no fault of their own, on the underside of oppressive and suffocating knees. So what can we do? You and I, both. I've come to doubt that there is a single Christian response that will look the same for all of us, a one-size-fits-all. Most of us, given the choice, will no doubt want to find ourselves more aligned with Jesus and the man born blind than with would-be disciples and the religious leaders of Jesus' day. We will certainly want to avoid an equivalent to the rebuke. If you were blind, you would not have sin. But now that you say we see, your sin remains. All the evidence from the reception Jesus received during his own short ministry is that we cannot do what is right without cost. We all need to find ways to make our own protests against racism and to declare our solidarity with Black and minority ethnic people in this country and worldwide, maximizing the publicity of our protests, all at the very same time as guarding as best we are able the lives of those who are especially vulnerable to the spread of COVID-19. This is a very big ask, and we are unlikely to find a simple solution. I'm going to stop short of suggesting precisely what you or I individually are called to do. All I would say is this: it needs to include concrete and visible action. It needs to address the immediate kairos, this moment in 2020, focused around the specific pain and distress among Black and minority ethnic people, legitimately crying out, Black Lives Matter. And it needs to take shape in the context of a wider root conviction that all lives matter. If we remain in doubt that there is today an urgent and serious call to action bearing down on us, it would do no harm to read John 9 again, and maybe then to engage in a simple meditative exercise. Perhaps we should try, as part of a prayerful engagement with God, one we can focus very easily in a conversation with Jesus, to give account of our own considered response to the current issues in the presence of the true light coming into the world. Amen.